The river didn't speak, it just dragged her. Cold mountain melt ran dark and fast beneath the grey sky, tumbling through bends carved deep by centuries. And somewhere between the thunder of whitewater and the hush of pine trees leaning over the banks, she came into view bound to a waterlogged pine log. Wrists lashed, hair tangled like black kelp across her bruised face. Her dress, if it had ever been whole, now clung in strips. One eye swollen shut, the other, barely open, caught the man watching from shore. His name was Clay Brunner. A man most folks forgot until they needed a post fixed or a coyote put down. He stood boot deep in river mud, weather-beaten hat low, rifle slung across his back, and a half-dead trout hanging from the line in his hand. But now, the line fell forgotten into the reeds. She saw him. That one eye locked on his, fierce with some kind of fire that hadn't drowned yet. Her mouth moved. He waded in before he heard it. By the time he dragged the log to shore, the girl was gasping and shivering, and her mouth had started bleeding from where her own teeth had bit it. He knelt beside her, pulled a knife, and she flinched so hard her body arched off the wood. "Easy," he muttered, low and hoarse. "Ain't here to finish what someone else started." The ropes gave way with a few angry snaps, and she crumpled into the riverbank like her bones had given out. Clay didn't ask who tied her. He didn't ask what she'd done to deserve it. He just stripped off his coat and covered her narrow shoulders. Then pulled her against him to keep her from shaking herself to death. She whispered then, barely audible, her voice like dry corn husks brushing together, "Is this what daughters get?" The wind shifted, lifting the scent of blood and river rot. Clay shut his eyes, just for a second. But let's go back to where it started. 3 days earlier, Clay had been in town for the first time in weeks picking up flour, nails, and a bottle of something sharp enough to help him sleep through the memory of his brothers screaming. Clay didn't talk about the war, but sometimes it found him anyway in dreams. In the twitch of his hands when thunder cracked too close. Larkspur was the kind of town where time felt stiff, like it never truly settled in. A saloon, a mercantile, a blacksmith, and a church that echoed emptier every Sunday. Folks there didn't look Clay in the eye much. Not out of dislike, just a quiet understanding that some men walked with ghosts too heavy to interrupt. It was on that dusty morning, near the feed store, when Clay first heard something about the girl. Preachers got her locked up at the river chapel. One ranch hand whispered to another, "Say she's a witch," cursed her own kin. Clay didn't pay it much mind. Town gossip was drier than biscuit flour and half as useful, until he saw the blood trail. It was 2 nights later. Coyotes had been nosing around his chicken pens, so he'd gone down with his rifle to set up an old trapline along the tree edge. That's when he noticed the smear on the rocks by the car. Thick, rust-colored streak, and a length of broken rope, half buried in moss. He followed it. Slow and quiet, boots barely making a sound in the underbrush. Just enough moonlight trickled through the fir trees to show him what he needed. Drag marks. Faint, but fresh. Something or someone had been hauled toward the riverbank no more than an hour ago, and then dumped. That's when he saw the log floating down, and the pale figure tied to it. Now, kneeling beside her in the mud, Clay wrapped her tighter in the coat. She'd stopped shivering, but that wasn't a good sign. Her lips were blue at the edges, her skin clammy. He needed to get her warm. "Can you stand?" he asked. She blinked, slow, didn't answer. He took that as a no, carefully. Like lifting something sacred or fragile ore, both he eased his arms under her knees and shoulders and rose with a low grunt. She weighed almost nothing. Like a child, or a scarecrow after harvest, Clay carried her up the ridge to the cabin tucked behind the rise, its cedar roof sagging like a tired shoulder. Inside, the fire had gone cold, but he set her down on the cot near the stove, built a quick blaze from kindling, and laid out a blanket fresh from the line. She didn't speak again until the fire crackled strong. Clay was ladling hot water into a tin cup, mixing it with crushed willow bark and a splash of the sharp bottle from town. She tried to sit, failed, then tried again until she was upright, blanket pulled to her chin. "Why'd you pull me out?" she asked, voice rougher now. But steady. He didn't turn. Just stirred the cup once more and handed it to her. Didn't seem right, leaving you to float. She sipped, winced, then looked at him over the rim. You from Larkspur? He nodded. Then you know why I was in that river. Clay sat back against the log wall, watching her in the glow of the fire. I heard stories, he said. Don't mean I believe 'em. Her eyes narrowed slightly, dark as pitch. You should. They're true. A silence stretched, full of unspoken things. The wind scratched the window panes like brittle claws. Clay let the quiet sit. Finally, she spoke again. My father's the preacher, she said flatly, and I told the truth about what he did. To my little sister. Clay's jaw tightened, her voice dropped low and bitter. He says daughters belong to God, but he acts like we're his to break. Outside, a coyote cried once. Then silence. Clay didn't reply. He just stood, crossed the room, and gently added another log to the fire. The flame flared, then settled. You're safe here, he said quietly. She didn't look at him this time, but her hand clutched the cup tighter. And in that small room, with the storm beginning to whisper through the pines, and a girl drying out beside a man who hadn't spoken 10 words all week, something shifted. Not loudly, not yet, but the air had changed, like a match had been struck in the dark by morning. Her fever had broken. Clay sat in the rocker just inside the door, carving a piece of wood he didn't care much about. He hadn't slept. The girl she still hadn't. Given her name lay curled under the blanket, breathing slow and steady now. Her skin no longer looked like wet parchment, but there was a tightness around her eyes. Like she expected pain to return at any moment. He finally asked as the sun filtered pale through the east window, What's your name? She shifted, stared. At the rafters. Ruth, she said, after a long pause. Ruth Ambler. Clay didn't move. Just nodded slightly, and said, Name like that belongs to a hymn. She scoffed. That's the point. My father gave us all Bible names. Makes it easier when he wants to say he's cleansing something. By mid-morning, Ruth had eaten a few bites of hard biscuit soaked in broth and was walking slow around the cabin with Clay's help. She had a split lip and a bruised rib. But more than that, she carried the weight of something unspoken, something old. They didn't say much more that day. Clay wasn't one to force words. But as night fell, Ruth asked to sleep near the fire. Instead of the cot, she said she didn't want to be alone, so he sat nearby, polishing the old pistol he hadn't used since Gettysburg. And that's when they heard the hooves. 3 riders, moving slow but with purpose, coming up the north trail. That wound behind the ridge like a snake in tall grass. Clay rose without a word, slipped the pistol into his belt, and stepped outside. Closing the door behind him, the horses stopped 20 yards from the cabin. The lead rider was Sheriff Amos Tolligray, bearded, one eye glassy from a whiskey. Fire years back, but still mean as a barbed hook. Beside him sat Levi Kerr, who owned the dry goods store. The third was young Elijah Peck, not much more than a boy, but armed and trying to stand tall. Morning, Clay, the sheriff called out. Sheriff, you get any visitors last night? Clay stared down at the toe of his boot for a second. Then back up. Why? Someone's gone missing, the sheriff said, eyes narrowing. From the river chapel, Preacher Ambler says his daughter ran off, left a mess behind her. She ain't missing, Clay replied, steady. She was dumped in the river with her hands tied. Levi's horse stamped nervously. So it's true, he muttered. You found her. You found her. Clay didn't answer. Sheriff Toller sighed and dismounted, the saddle creaking. Now, I ain't here to cause trouble, Clay, he said, walking forward. But that girl's been stirring up devils for weeks. She stood up in town, said things about the preacher, things that got people whispering in pews. Then the little one, the sister, went missing. They found her body last week in the ravine. Same night Ruth disappeared. Shall tell you any of this? The sheriff asked, suddenly. Sharp. Clay said nothing. Behind him, inside the cabin, Ruth stood watching from the window, her fingers white on the curtain. I know you're a good man, Clay, the sheriff went on. War tore up a lot of folks, but I gotta keep the peace. Preacher's saying she's dangerous. He says she killed her sister and tried to run. Preacher's lying, came Ruth's voice, clear and firm as she stepped out onto the porch. Clay didn't try to stop her. I didn't run, she said. He tied me to a log and shoved me into that river himself. The men stared. Ruth lifted her dress just high enough to show the rope burns still angry red around her ankles. He said God don't need whores in his house. She said quietly. He said, if I lived, it'd be God's choice. Sheriff Toller looked down at the dirt for a long time. Lord Almighty, he muttered. That true girl. I didn't kill my sister, Ruth said. I told my mother what he'd been doing to us. I thought she'd protect us. I was wrong, she told him. Clay stepped forward then, not loud, just firm. She's staying here, he said. Ain't turning her over to that man. If you got law to follow, follow it proper. Don't hand her back to a noose and call it. Justice Levi was shaking his head. You can't protect her, Branner, not from that preacher. Town's already twisted up in it. Some folks think she's possessed. Think she cursed that family. Ruth's voice dropped, like ash falling on snow. I cursed nothing. I survived. Sheriff Toller looked back at his horse, jaw tight. Then at Clay. I don't know what's true yet, he admitted. But I know Larkspur's riding itself into a frenzy. Preacher's gonna ride out here himself soon enough. Bring his own judgment. You tell him, Clay said. He steps foot on my land, he better bring more than a Bible. No one said anything for a long time. Then Toller mounted his horse again, his one good eye fixed on Ruth's, like he wasn't sure whether to fear her or pray for her. We'll be back, he said. Just don't make this harder than it needs to be. As they rode off into the trees, Ruth turned to Clay, trembling. You don't have to do this, she whispered. He'll bring others, I know. They'll come at night. I know, she paused. Then, why are you helping me? Clay didn't look at her. I got a sister, buried up by the ridge, he said. Died at 13. Town said she was cursed, too. Turns out all she had was a crooked spine and a mother who drank too much to notice. He stepped back inside. Ruth stared after him, and the last light of day bled out behind the trees. The sound of hoofbeats returned on the third night, but this time it wasn't cautious. It wasn't lawmen with reluctant eyes. It was the sharp rhythm of intent hooves pounding hard, drawing dust and silence in their wake. Clay was already outside before Ruth heard them. He stood on the porch with his rifle across one arm, lantern lit low beside him, casting flickers across the weathered pine of the cabin wall. His face was still, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment since he pulled her from the river. The preacher came riding in on a pale horse, flanked by 3 men in dark coats. No sheriff now, no badge, just faith and vengeance. Ambler was a tall man, with shoulders like carved stone and hair gone grey only at the temples. His Bible was strapped beside his hip like a sidearm, but the real weapon was in his eyes, cold, fixed, and furious. Clay didn't move. Ruth stepped into the doorway behind him. She wore one of Clay's old shirts, singed at the waist, and her hair hung clean now, but still damp at the ends. Her arms were crossed tight to her chest. Ruth, Preacher Ambler said, voice thick with warning, come down. She didn't reply. He raised a hand. One of the men beside him dismounted. Another clutched something wrapped in cloth. We come under the word, Ambler said, louder now. You were born to serve the Lord, girl, not to twist his gifts. Come back, and I will cleanse what's left of you. Clay lifted his rifle an inch. She's not going anywhere. Ambler's eyes slid to him like frost creeping across glass. You're standing in the path of righteousness, Mr. You think I don't see what you are? A broken man, clinging to the remains of your sin. Taking in filth like it'll wash your guilt away. You tied your daughter to a log, Clay said, voice even. She's still got the marks. She's possessed, Ambler snapped. She spread lies about this house. My house turned my own wife against me. God took her as penance. But this one still has a chance. Your wife died running from you, Ruth said quietly from behind Clay. She jumped from the river bluff because she saw what you were. That shut the clearing into a silence, thick as iron. Ambler's jaw clenched. Then he nodded to the man holding the cloth bundle. He unwrapped it slowly. A child's NIGHTDRESS. White. Stained with brown at the collar, Ruth went still. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I buried her, the preacher said. You left her, cold in a ditch. My youngest, Sarah, she deserved better than this. I never touched her, Ruth whispered, her voice cracking. I tried to protect her. I tried to tell Ma. She lied, Ambler roared, sudden and vicious. She divided our house. She tempted me. That's what daughters do when they forget God. Clay stepped forward, one boot heel pressing into the packed earth. His voice never rose. You ride any closer, he said, I'll put you in the ground before your sermon ends. The preacher's men tensed, hands on weapons, eyes darting. Then dash behind the treeliner. Second sound emerged, a single drumbeat, soft, distant. Then again, boom, boom, boom. Ambler froze from the ridge behind the cabin. Shadows emerged, figures on horseback. Wrapped in blankets, faces painted in the old way. Ute warriors, half a dozen, riding slow and silent, like ghosts coming home. One of them raised a hand to Clay. He returned the gesture with a single nod. Ruth turned to him, whispering, You sent for them. They've been watching the river trail since yesterday, Clay murmured. Old favor owed. They don't like what he did to the land. Ambler's eyes widened, but he hid his fear beneath a sneer. You called heathens to defend your witch. They came on their own, Clay said. Turns out they don't take kindly to little girls being dumped in sacred water. The preacher spat on the ground. This land ain't theirs. A woman among the Ute dismounted. Her braids swung low over her chest, and her gaze was colder than any preacher's wrath. She spoke in clear English, slow and cutting. This land has buried our daughters long before yours ever learned to weep. Ambler shifted in his saddle. Clay raised the rifle to his shoulder, calm as dusk. You take your men and ride, he said. Tonight's not yours. For a long breath, it hung in the balance, God's fury on one side, and the quiet resistance of grief on the other. Then Ambler did something Clay hadn't expected. He smiled, not kindly, but the kind of smile a wolf gives when it decides to retreat, not because it's beaten, but because it wants the fight to last longer. You think you've bought time, he said, but you'll never be safe. Not in this town. Not among liars and savages. He turned his horse, cloak flaring behind him, as they rode off. The night felt twice as loud with their absence. The Ute woman approached Clay as Ruth stepped forward, her hands trembling. You owe us no gold, the woman said softly. Just keep her warm. Clay nodded. They rode away without another word, and Ruth stood in the doorway, staring at the place her father had vanished into the dark. He'll be back, she said. Clay didn't disagree, but for now, the fire still burned. The cabin held a stillness that didn't quite feel like peace. Ruth sat near the hearth, her knees drawn up beneath Clay's old flannel. The fire cast a low amber glow across her face, dancing in the hollow places her father's hand had carved into her. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but inside, there was only breath and crackling wood. Clay moved slowly, setting a tin plate of cornbread and beans on the table near her, saying nothing. He didn't have many words left most days, and she didn't seem to need them. That suited him fine. She stared at the plate, then at her hands. I used to sing, she said suddenly. Clay looked up from the corner, one brow faintly raised. Ma taught me when I was little. Before the sermons got louder than the birds, before everything else quieted, he waited, letting the silence fill what didn't need speaking. We'd sit by the river, she went on. Back when he still preached with a soft voice, before the fever took Sarah the first time, that was when he changed. Said the devil comes through blood. That daughters are born with the curse already in She touched the rope burn round her wrist. I believed him for too long, Clay stood slowly, crossed to the shelf, and pulled down a weathered object wrapped in cloth. He unrolled it, gently a tin-framed photograph, faint with age. A girl, maybe 13, with a crooked smile, and her hands clasped in front of her dress. One shoulder sloped higher than the other. "My sister," Clay said. Martha's spine bent since birth. Folks said she was touched. Town wanted Ma to send her away to one of them homes in Denver. Ruth looked at him. Clay's jaw moved slightly before he spoke again. Pa didn't let them. Said she was God's way of teaching patience. But he died in a spring flood, and Ma couldn't carry the house alone. One day, she told Martha to hide when the inspector came. But Martha didn't. She walked right out. Into the yard. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Ruth stared at the photograph. Then reached out and brushed the frame with her fingertips. "They always call it God's will," she said, "but God never tied me to a log." They sat there a while, with only the fire between them. Later that night, Ruth stirred in her sleep. Clay, still in the rocker, opened one eye to see her whimpering, fists clenched, sweat on her brow. He stood, hesitated, then reached down and gently touched her shoulder. "Ruth," she gasped and sat upright, blinking wildly. "It's all right," he said, kneeling beside her. "It's just the wind." She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. "I saw her," she murmured. "Sarah, standing in the chapel, holding that doll she used to love. It was clean. It was like it had never touched dirt or blood." Clay didn't say anything. Ruth leaned forward, her voice low. She said, "I didn't leave her, that she knows. That she saw what I did. That she saw me try to fight." Tears clung to her lashes, but she didn't let them fall. Clay reached up, gently handed her a cup of water. His hand brushed hers for half a second. Longer than needed, she took it with both hands, sipped, then stared at the fire again. "I don't know if it was a dream," she said. "But it felt like something bigger." He nodded. "Some dreams ain't just dreams." She looked at him for a long moment. "You believe in anything?" Clay stood slowly, glancing once toward the shuttered window. "I believe in people who crawl out of rivers still breathing." That made her smile, small and crooked. Morning came slower the next day, as if even the sun didn't want to cross that ridge. Ruth helped sweep the porch, stiff in her limbs but stronger than she'd been. Clay chopped wood out back, every swing of the axe sending dull echoes through the trees. Later, while she stirred the pot on the stove, Ruth asked, "What'll they do next?" "If he comes back," Clay leaned in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. "Preacher's not a man who forgives. He'll want control back. Not just over you, over the whole town. Might not bring guns next time. Might bring scripture and fear. Those are harder to shoot at." Ruth stirred slower. "I should leave," she said. "You should rest. I don't want you getting killed over this." Clay stepped forward, voice quiet. "You didn't bring the trouble, you just survived it. That ain't something to run from." She turned to him, eyes tired but sharp. "You don't even know me." He met her gaze, steady. "I don't need to." That night, she left the door cracked open when she laid down near the fire. And Clay, after checking the trapline twice, sat on the porch longer than usual, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the trees. Somewhere deep in the woods, a nightbird called once, then fell quiet. But inside the cabin, Ruth finally slept without crying out. Dawn broke like a held breath finally released. Soft blue spilled over the pines, and mist curled low across the ground, clinging to the roots and stones like ghosts reluctant to rise. Clay stood at the fence line, his rifle slung over his shoulder, a cup of bitter coffee steaming in his hand. From the cabin, smoke trailed from the chimney in a straight, gentle line, peaceful to peaceful. He didn't trust it. Behind him, the door creaked open. Ruth stepped out, wrapped in his old duster, boots unlaced but on her feet for the first time since the river. Her hair was still damp from the wash basin. She looked better, not healed, but upright. "I had another dream," she said softly. Clay didn't turn. She said, "I had to bury her properly, that it's not safe until she's in the ground, not just hidden." He glanced over. Ruth nodded. Sarah Clay took a slow sip. Then we'd best find her. They saddled up the horses just after first light, packed a shovel, 2 blankets, and Ruth's memory of where they used to hide when the shouting started. It wasn't far, just 2 hills over, down past a hollow of cottonwoods where the stream forked into 2. The younger kids called it the belly, because the land dipped soft and held echoes. They found her wrapped in burlap beneath a cairn of loose stone, near the burned-out husk of an old smokehouse. Animals hadn't touched Hermaby out of luck, maybe out of something else. Ruth didn't speak for a long time. She just sat in the dirt, her hands trembling in her lap, staring at the small form now uncovered. She was so small, she whispered. I didn't remember her being so small. Clay knelt beside her, the shovel resting across his knees. Go on and say it, she said bitterly. I should have done more. I should have told sooner. No, Clay said. You did the hardest thing there is. You told the truth when no one wanted to hear it. She closed her eyes. I think I wanted someone to kill me for it. Make it simple. He looked at her. You didn't float down that river to die. You made it through. They dug in silence. The sun crept higher, burning away the mist. By the time the grave was finished, Ruth's arms were streaked with dirt, her hair clinging to her face. Clay wrapped the body gently in the cleaner of the 2 blankets, then stood back. Ruth knelt alone by the edge. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I waited too long. I'm sorry I didn't pull you out first. The wind stirred. She forgave you already, Clay said softly. Ruth lowered her head and began to hum. It was an old hymnody, a thread of melody, but she sang it anyway, her voice cracking and clear and full of every ache the land had carried. When she finished, they covered Sarah with soil, stone by stone, until only the shape of the mound remained. Covered with pine needles and wildflowers, Ruth picked with trembling hands. On the way back, they heard shouting from the ridge. Smoke, not from the cabin but from Larkspur. By the time they rode to the overlook, they could see it clear. The chapel was ablaze. Flames clawed high through the steeple. Villagers stood at a distance, some watching, others throwing water from too far. Tamata, and at the center, shouting scripture over the roar, was preacher Ambler. His robes were scorched, his eyes wild. He had snapped. Sheriff Toller stood off to one side, watching, hands folded, face pale. Clay and Ruth rode down slow, stopping just behind the gathered townsfolk. Ambler didn't see them at first. He was too busy screaming. This is the price of sign. The Lord warned us, said the rotten must be burned. The daughters must be cleansed. Then Ruth stepped forward. Stop it, she said. The crowd turned. Whispers rose. Ambler froze. She walked through the line of onlookers, like someone walking toward gallows and salvation at the same time. Come, measured. You burned your own house, she said, because you couldn't burn me. Daughter of lies, Ambler hissed. You bewitched this town. I buried Sarah this morning, Ruth said. That stopped him. I sang for her, she said. Said goodbye, she's at peace, and you never will be. Ambler stepped toward her, jaw trembling, eyes unfocused. But this time, no one followed him, no men beside him, no hands reaching for ropes or rifles. Even Toller stepped back. You will answer to God, Ambler muttered. Quieter now. Not me, not them. I already have, Ruth said. He pulled me from the river. Clay stepped beside her. Ambler's shoulders sagged. He dropped his Bible, fell to his knees in the ash. No one spoke. The fire burned out behind him, leaving only cinders and smoke spiraling into the morning sky. 3 weeks later, Ruth stood beside the marker Clay had carved with his own hands. Just a small slab of pine, sanded smooth, with her sister's name burned into it. Sarah, a child of the river. Returned Clay packed the last of the winter supplies onto the mule. He glanced over his shoulder at her. You sure you want to stay out here? He asked. Could find a place closer to town now. Ruth shook her head. Town's got to remember itself first. I'll wait. You'll be safe. She smiled faintly. I am now. He tipped his hat and turned back toward the trail, but as he started down the ridge, she called after him. Clay. He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for pulling me out." He nodded. "You did the hard part." Then he walked off into the tall grass, disappearing into the hush of pine and wind and all the silence between one breath and the next. The river kept flowing, but it would never carry her again.